Hey guys, welcome back to another video. And in today's video, I'll be talking about my last TDX video I made, which was TDX the good, the bad, and the needs to change for Christmas 2024. And that video received a lot of views and comments. And so in today's video, I'll be talking about the origin of the video, the comments from the video, and finally, changing some of my suggestions up with some of the comment suggestions instead. And so, without further ado, let's start the video off with the origin. On December 6, 2024, we got some new leaks of what I assumed at first was gonna be a new skin for helicopter. But upon other leaks of the tower, I was pretty disappointed and worried, since I originally thought it was gonna be a Cryo Ranger type tower, meaning that it'll be a combination of two different towers into one. But it'll end up suffering from being a mid tower due to its poor stats. And I was gonna make a video about it, but during the making of that video, I was doing some testing, and so I wasn't able to make the video, or even get 25% of it done. Until Christmas part to release, I decided to reuse the idea again, but instead it'll sorta just be a review, my opinion type video format instead. Now that I've told you about the origin of the video, let's talk about some of the comments, and before we start, I'll only be picking 3 comments for this video, due to their points basically being heavily better than mine's. Anyways, to first start things off, the first comment I'll be going over will be from @Dragonfire, and he basically says how my points for the event towers were, and I quote, "Utterly ridiculous," which I heavily agree with, due to the fact that 1. I didn't even test the 2 towers out at all. 2. I over-exaggerated Cryo Heli for being a bad tower, and 3. The way that I executed this point was just horrible. The next, or I guess you could call it, the second comment we'll be going over, is from @quote-ROBLOX. And he says how if John does end up nerfing Christmas part to Nightmare, then it'll basically remove the satisfaction of those players who did hours of attempts just to beat this game mode, which I heavily agree with. Because think about it, you just spent around either 24 hours to 3 straight days just to beat this game mode and to get the funny Boomer Tower. And then a couple days later, or I guess around 4 days to 2 weeks later, John does a nerf to Christmas part to Nightmare, basically adding a couple more waves, nerfing some of the enemy's shield health, but most importantly, finally nerfing General Sailgar's overpowered abilities. And as you might have expected, the game mode doesn't feel the same anymore because of it. And that's why I agree with this comment. Also sorry for the non-stop blabbering. 3. And before we get to the next and final comment, I do have to say that the way I summarize this person's comment might sound like I'm putting a bad impression on this person, which I'm not trying to do. I'm simply just summarizing his comment. Anyways, back to the next and final comment of this section. The next comment and last comment we'll be going over in this section is from @FNI for 653, which he basically talks about how some of my complaints about the Christmas part to Nightmare difficulty were implemented to make the game mode harder, and how we shouldn't worrying about newer players not being able to get the Icebreaker Tower, because it's not our problems to worrying about it. And he also says, and I quote, "I don't get why you're surprised about the game mode intended to being hard," which I already knew the game mode was gonna be hard BTW, but I'm just putting that out there. Anyways, the reason why I added this comment to this section was because I had a mixed opinion on it, since I personally believe that in any event, everyone should have an equal chance to be able to get the limited time items in that event and to not gatekeep it to other players. And when analyzing the first couple of sentences in this comment, in present day, I do somewhat agree with it, since back during the production of that video, I was still trying to beat Christmas part to Nightmare. And I was heavily suffering from med skill issue in it. And I guess you could say that I was sorta over-exaggerating those complaints a bit as well too, in the video. And those paragraphs basically sum up my mixed opinion on this comment. 3. Now that you've listened to some of the comments that I agree with, let's now do some changing. And before I forget, this section will also only have 3 comments as well too, since just like with the second section of this video, their suggestions are better than mine. Anyways, without further ado, let's start our last section of today's video. For @Dragonfire, instead of over-exaggerating about how bad Cryo Heli is, which it's not, I should have simply just stuck with just saying how I didn't like the concept of it and how I should have just never over-exaggerated it instead. Although I would say it's pretty overpowered, that's mainly due to its ignore freeze resistance. Also, this is a bit off track, but I personally think that the TDX dev team should rework their ignore resistance system. Just saying. 3. Anyways, at Dragonfire also made a suggestion for a proper way for newer players to get the Icebreaker Tower, which is to simply make 2 versions of this tower, where one is for newer players to easily get by beating Christmas part to normal mode, where it'll basically just act like the normal Icebreaker Tower, but slightly weaker I guess, while for more experienced players, they can get it through the normal nightmare difficulty of Christmas Part 2, where, just like with the newer player version of it, it'll basically be the same tower, but much stronger. And hey, you could say that pro version of the Icebreaker Tower could possibly be a golden version of the original one. 3. Anyways, the next comment that made a suggestion was from at CRISci1240, and they suggest that instead of beating Christmas Nightmare Part 2 with present loadouts to get the Icebreaker Tower, instead you would have to grind for what I presume would be a separate currency from the game itself. Like for example in tower battles, to get the Golden Towers, you'd need to grind for a certain amount of wins to get either the Golden Scout or Golden Commando. And now looking back at my original idea to add preset loadouts for the nightmare difficulties, and I'll keep this brief, but it does seem unfair, and it seems like it does remove the purpose of what a nightmare game mode is supposed to be, which I wasn't intending to do. And now on to the last suggestion, and this suggestion is coming from at currently like TDS, and he says that if we did get the return of the railgun turrets from Halloween Chapter 4, then they'd basically act the same as they did last time, but instead, they'd be able to nerf General Sailgar's shield ability, but the downside would be that you'd need to manually aim it in order for the turret itself to attack the boss, like how the Gatling gun tower works in TDS. And that's basically it for today's video, and I do hope you enjoyed it. And hey, maybe hit that subscribe button as well, if you feel like it. But like I said before, thank you for watching today's video, and I hope to see you again in the next one. Also thanks Mega for commenting on my video. I really appreciate it. 3.